Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the ACES webinar today. Thank you everyone for being here. Right. All right, so this is the first of our ACES webinar series. Quick housekeeping item. This is going to be recorded, and a copy of that recording will be provided to everyone by the end of the week. We'll also be issuing certificates of continuing education. Those will be issued as well by the end of the week. All right. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Okay, if I can get this to work, bear with me here. There we go. All right, so quick executive summary here, just overview of the topics for the day. I'm going to start with taking a step back and thinking about how we do subsurface characterization and what those inherent limitations are. We want to think about how we can overcome those, and we're going to do that with something we call electrical hydrogeology, which we'll get into a bit so we all understand what we mean by that. Then we'll take a look at two different case studies and then what we can do with the technology in terms of monitoring and seeing what happens in the subsurface across continuous 2D planes. And we'll just kind of think about what the key takeaways are, and then we'll open it up from discussion from there. All right, so if we think about how we've been doing characterization, whether that's for groundwater resources or environmental remediation, a site or a project comes to our desk. We need to figure out the subsurface. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to deploy a rig. we need to we need to see what's going on down there, and for many decades, that's been done by some type of drill rig going down and collecting core and cuttings and samples. We take that information, we put it into logs. We can even get fancy and run geophysical tools and other types of tools down the holes to get these more advanced logs, higher resolution. And what we do is we start putting those together, and we use all of our years of experience and practice to make our best guesses as to what's happening in between the wells. But despite our best efforts, at the end of the day, even a good cross section can have 50 meters of space where we're just interpolating. So a lot of room there for not knowing what's going on or not seeing the fracture of interest, for example. So what do we do? We go into 3D space. We drill more holes, and we put it in software. We do very sophisticated algorithms to interpolate what's going on between the wells. Um, but at the end of the day, we still haven't really solved our data density issue. And so if we think about this model here, which is a very good model, this is a great project. Very, very sound methods, good data quality, and they did, see to some extent where the plume was. But if we just think about the raw numbers of a site like this, which is a very traditional kind of par for the course type investigation, what we find is, so we have a 120,000 square meter site on the surface. And what we saw when we went down in with 56 boreholes, and they went down to 30 meters, they had 106 piezometers. So if we take all of that three-dimensional space, and we're very generous, we give a 1 meter diameter to every hole drilled and go down to 30 meters, and we think about the volume of the actual subsurface that we saw versus the actual volume of the whole subsurface that we're investigating, it actually comes out to be far less than 1% of the 3D domain is actually interacted with. So, that leaves 99 plus percent of the 3D domain is actually interpolation. So, it can be a helpful guide, but it just lacks the data density to really give you good certainty in your subsurface models. So that's what ACES's goal is to try to fill in these question marks here. What's happening between these wells? Furthermore, if we think about a lot of the projects that we all work on, the most interesting parts are typically the paleo channels or the faults and fractures, where things are either moving or being prevented from moving by those features. Those are typically oriented in a vertical fashion. So another inherent flaw by interacting in the subsurface simply with vertical tools and vertical wells, we put ourselves in a situation where we're inherently struggling to characterize the most important parts of the subsurface we need to understand for our projects. Um, so that's again, that's these are the issues ASTIS set out to solve 20 plus years ago. And really, at the end of the day, what we want to do is prevent limited information about the subsurface from wasting time and resources. So if we think about other industries out there in the world, other folks that have had to um, solve problems with things that they can't see or directly interact with. Two things come to mind. It'd be the medical industry and the oil and gas industry. So if you go to the doctor and with stomach pains, he's not going to just grab the scalpel and get to work, see what's hurting your stomach. They're going to do an ultrasound or a CT scan. They're going to scan you and take a look, see if they can see what's going on. Something looks bad enough in the scan, a professional will say, "Hey, this doesn't look good," but it's just a scan. We have to do a biopsy. So our data works much the same way. And we'll dive more into that as we go here. But we can think about the oil and gas industry and their use of 3D seismic. Initially, guys were out there running around poking holes and seeing what oil would come up from it, and that was great in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But as the 20th century went on, as seismic came to be, as you can imagine, the first folks that heard about seismic thought, what a bunch of whack jobs trying to thump the ground and tell us they can see where the oil's at because they hit the ground real hard or set off some dynamite. But decades later, it's common practice, and if you're in that industry, you would think it would be insane to try to go drill blindly looking for oil. So we're trying to bring that same concept to the environmental industry, and that's both for groundwater resources and environmental remediation. Now, scanning tools are great, but caveat here. I like to use the example on the left here. Our guy with a nail in his head. He's a great example for us to point out that most cases are not like this. So the story behind this picture, true or not, I do not know, but supposedly a guy was doing construction using a nail gun, and there was a ricochet. Nail goes into the top of his mouth so quick and so fast he can't feel it or see it. He just starts having a sore in the roof of his mouth. So he goes to the dentist. Dentist does the X-ray and pretty quickly says, "I see what your issue is there." Now, we could also give this X-ray to a fifth grade class or even a kindergarten class, and ask the kids, "What's this guy's problem here?" And they're going to say, "Well, he's got a nail in his head." But most scans are not like that. Most of the time, you've got a toothache, and the dentist is looking at the upper T3 molar or whatever it is, and looking at the variation and the shading, this, that, and the other, and all these details that he learned in school. And same thing with 3D seismic. You've got whole teams working for those companies that are integrating, synthesizing, and interpreting that data. So that's much the same with ASIS's data. We do collect scans, but they do take a team of folks that understand how to read them. So ASIS's scan is electrical resistivity imaging in its basic form. So for those of you on the call not familiar, that's simply taking a series of electrodes, and you take two of them, you inject electrical current into the ground, create the electrical field you can see in the diagram there. Meanwhile, an instrument is measuring the potential drop with two other electrodes. This will be labeled M and N. So again, the current injecting electrodes are A and B, the electrical current injecting electrodes. And so every time you do that setup, you get one measurement. And what you do is our surveys have 50, 28, 56 electrodes, some number of electrodes, and an instrument is picking different combinations of electrodes. which give different data points at different places. And what that results in is the image on the left here. So you can see all the data points plotted out there, each data point collected by a different combination of A, B, M, and N. And what that does is gives us a nice data dense continuous 2D map of the subsurface and a cross-sectional view. And we can do things like we can start to map out competent bedrock based on changes in electrical signatures and looking at places where anomalies are. So that's how it all works in its basic form. ASTIS did improve resistivity technology. The standard methodologies fell short of what we needed to do good work for the environmental industry so that we can get to that place where oil and gas and medical are, of just it's a no-brainer, and the first thing you do when you have a problem is you just go scan and see what the deal is and go from there. The environmental industry didn't have that, and it didn't, based on initial research, it didn't seem like electrical or other methods were going to work. Everything has its limitations, and this one seemed to have the least amount of limitations. And with some improvements, we actually were able to get the GeoTrack survey, which it does a much better job of what we say seeing in the dark. So traditional methods have a hard time resolving the electrically dark parts of the picture. So that would be the places where things are resistive. And if we think especially about environmental remediation, that's going to be the most interesting part of the picture. All the NAPLs out there that we need to track down are liquid resistors, and as their concentrations go up in the subsurface, they should present resistive anomalies. So what we see here is that over a known gasoline spill, and these data sets were from early in company history when the method was being proven. So they set up a survey, they collect this data set right here. They don't change anything except they use the GeoTrack's acquisition protocols, and what we can see is that we actually detected two resistors versus just one. So traditional methods were totally blind to this resistor over here. And whereas it did detect this one, it really didn't show just how strong it was. And these anomalies were confirmation drilled afterwards and did have gasoline impacts in them. So just demonstrating that the GeoTrack survey is a much stronger approach to being able to get good scanning data. So the scanning tool is great, but there's nothing magic about how we're able to come up with good CSMs or conceptual site models for our clients. That's done through electrical hydrogeology. So as promised, we'll define that, and it's pretty simple. It's just taking everything that a traditional hydrogeologist does, looking at the potentiometric surface, looking at lithology logs, and looking at water quality through stiff diagrams or Piper plots, looking at the groundwater chemistry and geology maps, and we put all that together. We to understand what we're looking at through the electrical pictures, and that integration of those two things there is what is so powerful and helps you understand the subsurface and really in three dimensions, in a very robust way. So to kind of show it in a cartoon version here, we've got our site. So we'll just look at a simple gas station site. We've got the gasoline blob shown in the red and yellow. Traditional methods, as we discussed earlier, you're just taking the rig out there, poking holes. If you find something dirty, you clean it up. The problem is, again, you don't know what's going on between those wells. So our solution is we put metal stakes in the ground, cable them up there on the surface. We see those electric currents running through the ground. That generates the imagery, and we do that in all directions. So we get a nice 3D grid, and then we can connect the anomalies to understand things like flow paths through these very data dense scans that we're looking at in 3D space. And that sets us up so that we can send the remediation team in to really knock it out of the park and get most, if not all, of the contamination associated with the site. So this is an idealized scenario with the cartoon, but this is really what we're going for with the electrical hydrogeology process. So hooray for the ready gas site. All right, so our first case study is going to be looking at a refinery in the southern U.S. So they had a big problem, and this process can be used to solve simple dry cleaner and gas station sites, but it can be used to solve some really big problems too. So this refinery had LNAPL and paleo channels, and those paleo channels were up to 500 feet in thickness. Um, and again, it's an active refinery, so pretty significant issue there. So they had surrounding farmers and communities that they wanted to protect as their contaminant plume stretched out, as we can see in the map diagram in the upper right, it was stretching out over 2 miles. And they knew they had production groundwater pumping wells down gradient, and they just saw this thing spreading out and moving in a linear fashion, and um, drilling wells hundreds of feet deep to sort it out was pretty scary to the financial model. So yeah, they had a really serious issue on their hands, and they had some serious product leaking out of their facility as well. So some of the wells had measured 10 feet of LNAPL thickness, and yeah, again, groundwater table wasn't even till 320 feet below ground surface. So big issues to solve here. So they went out there just looking for other options to characterize the site. They came across ASTIS, and we went out there and performed quite a large network of scanning. So we went roughly over 3 miles down gradient. We were stretched out over a mile in width there, which we kind of north to south. We're looking at a 3D angle. But yeah, we collected geophysical data sets under all of these black lines here to try to map out what was going on for miles down gradient from the refinery. And we were looking down 540 feet BGS with our images. So here, once we start getting results back, we see features like this right here. This is our best shot from that data set where we can just see we have a lot of paleo channel structures, but this one was the most clear cut, and it had this big, strong resistive signal down at the bottom, which once they drilled into, that did turn out to be NAPL, well filled up with 5 feet of NAPL, I think in like a day's time frame versus weeks or months in the other wells. So we'd hit a very permeable zone, and pretty narrow too. If we think about looking across miles, and this thing is only 250 feet or so wide, that's a pretty narrow margin. And then we get further confirmation in the imagery that we're seeing NAPL-filled paleo channels, with the fact that we have monitoring well C over here showing, no channel structure and no strong resistors going down to depth. So the pictures right away are telling us some pretty useful things. And again, when we extrapolate that out for miles, we can now start to see how that feature we were just looking at, which would be right here, now how does that connect up gradient back towards the refinery, and how does that go down gradient? And by doing a deep dive into the data behind these images, we were able to connect a series of paleo channels throughout the domain, which the remediation team has been, or the groundwater model team has been using um, to get their stuff dialed in. So when they go to remediate, they've got a good solid plan. So just to recap, the scanning gave them targets. It showed the elusive pathways, the paleo channels meandering for miles down gradient for hundreds of feet at hundreds of feet deep. Understanding that surface, that Permian red bed surface down below, the Ogallala sediments was a big win for the project team and the groundwater modeling team, which they're able to do all of that based on that higher data density and the ability to see around the subsurface and not be limited to what you're seeing in the holes that you drill. And so their own management team estimated that by using ASTIS, they were able to save 20 million. So that's a huge victory for them, and that's the kind of stuff that the scanning can help our clients achieve. So moving on to clean water. So we're going to leave the contaminants behind here and just talk about finding clean water for municipalities. So again, there's nothing magic going on here. Is a lot of homework to understand these pictures. So experience and practice reading them, along with doing a lot of homework is how you get good conceptual site models. So we're looking at our team is looking at a lot of the same data that our clients are looking at and the other consulting firms that we work with. So again, there's your stiff plots on the groundwater chemistry map, and we've got the geology and the fault maps. We're looking at the well logs. So everything we can get our hands on, everything that the client can provide to us, and everything we can find publicly available. That just helps us read the pictures. So when we scan and we have a little bit understanding of what the local setting is hydrogeologically, we can know what we're getting into. So here's a couple of examples of pictures that were taken in a fractured carbonate aquifer in Oklahoma. Um, on the Pinner Ranch example, which would be the one on the left, we can see some fault structures there. So the blues and the grays breaking through the browns are showing us places where the rock has been weakened and cracked, and so those are decent places to target. So we put our targets there. I don't know that those have ever been drilled, but those would be where you'd put your targets in the pink dashed lines there. Um, on the right-hand side would be an example of we did an image. They wanted to know if they could drill anywhere along that image, and we came back and we said, well, everything's pretty resistive overall. You can see a little bit of the blues there on the Wapanucka image on the right. However, these blues aren't overly conductive. So thinking about the shape and the degree of resistivity, we can estimate, yeah, we don't think you guys are going to find anything great, but if you're going to drill a well, once you go through this, what looks like the most broken up part of the rock, and sure enough, I think it even came up a little bit under 10 gallons per minute, but there's a little bit of water in a section where it got blue, but overall it was not a good producing well. But we were able to tell them ahead of time, hey guys, we don't think this one's going to work out super great, but it was the only spot they had, and so they went ahead to drill it to see what they would get. But knowing ahead of time is very powerful. And even better is when you can take an image and have a target and go for something that you have some good confidence in. So this was a really great example where um, wells in the area were reporting 8 to 35 gallons per minute, and they definitely were needing more than that. There were some indications that it was possible, but it was a bit like throwing a dartboard at the wall blindfolded. So we went out and we did some scans in a few different areas for this one, but on this picture here, we saw this resistive anomaly, and we said, hey, we think that's going to indicate, cleaner, more permeable sand content, and we're below the water table, so we think that that's a good target. And so they drill that target, and sure enough, get plenty of water. We get good clean sand. And the well ends up producing around 110 gallons per minute, which is what they needed. So we had a happy town and a good data set. So something I do want to point out here, though, that just thinking about these pictures are not the nail in the head scenario. If we go back here and we say, okay, we're targeting these conductive spots here where it's blue and gray. We think that's representing where the rock is more fractured and permeable. Where the browns, it's getting really resistive, and that's likely representing hard rock. Well, that's in a fractured carbonate aquifer. If we go over here to a sand aquifer, now we're looking at a sand aquifer that's overlain by shales and clay, and so those things are very conductive because of the mineral content. And so now we're looking for the resistive spots as being the ones to contain more water. So this interpretation process is nuanced, and it really does take that homework to get good targets for our clients. So back to our fractured carbonate aquifer here, another section of the aquifer that we imaged. We see a big, strong vertical conductor here. So getting very conductive, good clean breakthrough all the way down to the bottom of the image. So we say, yeah, this is a good target. So send the drill rig out there. And they got 450 gallons per minute during testing, and then once they completed the well, they were able to produce 700 gallons per minute. So it found a real gusher. And again, you could have gone out here and drilled, just 30, 40, 50 feet to the left, and you would have had a mostly dry hole. So margin for error is super big there. So using the scanning data to target is just a great way to save time and resources and get things in the right place from the get-go. All right. So moving on here. So now we'll talk about temporal imaging and the benefits that offers. So again, we're in our fractured carbonate aquifer here, and the electrical scanning data really, in general, provided a good, say, semi-regional understanding of this aquifer in a matter of years versus decades. So we were able to figure out key geologic faults that were at play. We were able to figure out things like the groundwater flow direction can change 90 degrees under different water table conditions. And and figuring all that out in a matter of years is just very helpful to move these types of things along. Ends up being a lot cheaper at the end of the day too, if you take years of expenses off the rap sheet. So again, that surface deployed scanning really saves a lot of time and money. So with a understanding of the semi-regional setting, we know we've got up to a kilometer thick of karst dolomite, and on the edge of that sits Bird's Mill Spring, which has connection through a fault to a sinkhole up gradient. And the thought was a nearby town wanted to use this as an enhanced aquifer recharge site. Um, However, that ham fault as a flow path is only active during certain water table conditions, but again, that gives them the ability to maybe augment that and work with it, because these electrical scans provided them the data density to understand the system enough to even consider things like that. Um, but as they continue to get a more detailed understanding of the flow system in this area, they wanted to look at doing temporal imaging around the sinkhole. So with the temporal imaging, we need to get our cables out so we can collect our electrical measurements. But if we're going to set this up and leave it out there for weeks, months, or years even, those cables smell like vegetables to many animals. So cattle and deer and rabbits and things like to go chew on them. So you can't just let them sit on the ground. You've got to bury them. And so they'll look like something like this. There's different ways to complete them up at the surface, but basically you'll have a cable sticking up out of the ground. That cable just goes down a smidge and out, and then go across this purple line here. And what you're able to do is you can see everything that's happening below this purple line hydrogeologically as you take the repetitive measurements. So again, those cables are put down in the ground, so you trench out a foot or two deep. Instead of using metal stakes, you're going to use a pile of hydrated bentonite around the electrode, and you're going to bury that, and that becomes your in-place electrode. So diagram of it there. You've got your hookups for your instrument, and then you're going to see everything inside this trapezoid. So you're going to see down 144 feet and 722 feet in length, and then you're able to watch everything happening in your aquifer in this domain here. So this would be the first image that was collected, and we can see our epikarst zone in the bright colors up top sitting, or bottoming out right there at the water table. The grays are showing us our more competent bedrock signals. We know that the ham fault goes through here. That's through old geologic mapping and supported by electrical data sets, both ours and HEM data collected by the USGS. So everything's looking pretty good here. We come back out, take another image 6 months later, and we can see how the aquifer dried. So again, we had 6 months, no rain, and we can see that the Vado zone did not dry out uniformly. Rather, it happened in discrete vertical zones, and that's likely where there's more fracturing up near the surface associated with the Ham's fault. But again, we are watching the aquifer change across 722 feet down to 144 feet. And we can do it again when it rains. So after there's a storm event, go back out there. Now we can see the recharge pattern. across that domain of the aquifer. So again, we see Ham's Fault coming into play, and we see these two zones where it really is migrating vertically through. So if you think about monitoring an aquifer, traditionally we've done it with monitoring wells, which are which are great. It tells you where the water table is at a particular elevation. Um, But if we think about monitoring a plane and watching how an aquifer is changing across a 722 foot by 144 foot domain, it's a far more robust and informative data set that you get. Um, so that's what we hope to see the industry gravitating towards is this approach here. And to kind of summarize the difference between what we've been doing for many decades as environmental practitioners and what ASTIS is trying to bring the industry towards is we want to have distinct preferential flow paths delineated versus them being estimated, and looking at contours and trying to guesstimate where the flow path might be. Maybe get lucky and get a well in it, but getting two or three to really help understand its trajectory would be great, but almost impossible. So again, we want to be in that delineated flow path situation. We want to get away from the big gaps between the wells. We want to see what's going on between them. So, we want to put a well right in the heart of that paleo channel right here. We don't want that paleo channel sitting right here in these question marks and us having no idea why it's clean, and somewhere else it's, down gradient, it's super hot, and we have no idea how it got there. um, and we want our 3D models to be data rich and provide good information across the whole domain, and not have the big question marks in between them. So again, to summarize, what we want to do is we want to avoid endless rounds of drilling, sampling, and reporting without getting to a good conceptual site model that you can take action on and get good remedial results or good groundwater yields. There are a lot of other good tools out there to use. And, ASIS wants to make sure those get put in the interesting spots, right? In the anomalies. That's what tells you the key information for your conceptual site model. And we all want to save money, right? A lot of these projects are done on taxpayer dollars, and, we want to be good stewards of that. And this scanning is a great way to do that. So, to do these projects, it is a collaboration between responsible parties, consultants, professionals like ourselves, the regulatory community. We've all got to collaborate and work together. So we need the whole industry to kind of embrace this concept here. And, I think we can really move the ball forward and get a lot better results with a lot less resources, which is good for the community at large. So, like I mentioned at the top of the webinar, this is the beginning of a series we're going to be doing for some amount of time. We don't know, but definitely join them while they're going on. So the next one's going to be Tuesday, August 19th. That's going to be presented by our very own project manager, Samantha Franzen. And she's going to be talking about, she's going to be diving into the monitoring quite a bit more and looking at, the costs between traditional and electrical monitoring, and really diving into that. These slides will be provided in PDF form, so there's a link to that webinar. We'll also be sending that out, I imagine, with the CEU certificates and a copy of this slide deck, as well as the recording. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Hi, Kyle. I'm going to go ahead and unmute people so that they can ask questions. I do ask, though, if you are not going to be asking questions, or if you maybe have some background noise, to please mute yourself. So let me do that so everybody can ask questions.
Thanks, Michelle. And you can either ask your questions in the chat if you're feeling shy, or feel free to chime right in.
And just so people know, there will be an email that goes out with the recording that will have the link to our next webinar in it, as well as where you can download this presentation. The CEU certificates will be sent out separately, and you will have everything, as Kyle mentioned, by the end of the week. We're just need to get everything organized so we can do that. But anybody have any questions for Kyle? We also have Todd on here as well, Todd Hallahan, our CTO, as well as a couple of other people from ASTIS are on here if you have any questions.
I have a question. Hi, Kyle. Hi, Todd. This is Koala. It's good to virtually. It's been a while. But I had a question about if this technology, if you've ever seen this used in like more shallow or tidally influenced geological formations and spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've done, I know one that comes to mind would be a refinery project up in the Northeast near the coast, where the Delaware River is kind of dropping into the Atlantic. But yeah, we were looking at NAPL seeps coming out of a river embankment there in a tidally controlled part of the river. I know Todd and Stuart have done work back before my time on some tidal stuff. I don't know if that was contaminated related. I don't know, Todd, if you want to chime in on that project.
Yeah, we've worked a number of jobs at the coast, and whether that's a freshwater or saltwater coast, it's the advantage is that you could take the imaging and you don't have to worry about the rig having trouble at the beach or in the water. We can basically go off into the water and take images. We can come back and go across the coast. So there's different combinations we can do that you can get that image that you're wanting to see what's happening at those different boundaries. So whether that's for contaminant, we've been chatting with some folks with saltwater intrusion issues to manage their coastal wells and things like that. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll definitely be in contact because that's what we're looking at too, is saltwater intrusion. So
well, awesome. Be good to run back into you again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I got a question on chat for max depth, and we've gone down about 1,200 feet, and it's 5 times longer than it's deep. So when you start doing 1,000-foot shots, you're at mile scale. So you've got some logistics. We've done those through cities as well. And we've done contaminants, and drilled targets at 700-800 feet and been successful. So you need some logistics if you're in a city, and you just need a lot of cable if you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, we have a couple other questions through the Q&A. One from Jared Udell is, how well does the technology do in highly variable or very steep terrain?
Oh, great. We've used it on mountainsides a few times. It's a logistical issue, kind of like Todd was just saying. It's just a matter of making sure the grade is steep enough to walk, or safe enough to walk on. But as long as we can get stakes connected to the earth and cables hooked up, we can collect an image.
Great. And then Lad Calhoun also has a question. Can you provide exemplars demonstrating cost effectiveness compared to traditional delineation at typical dry cleaner sites?
Absolutely. We've got a great case study from Seattle. It was a brownfield site. So they had a dry cleaner related DNAPL plume, and it was separated into 2 horizons. Anyway, we went out there, we scanned, they performed remedial treatments based on the conceptual site model, and their estimates say we saved them 3.7 million by targeting the remediation. We've got several others, Todd. I'm sure you can think of at least 2 or 3 others.
Yeah, we've got a nice coastal one in Michigan that saved about, I think it was somewhere between 3 or 8 million. This was quite a while ago. But we could show them that, dredging up the entire coast area wasn't actually needed. There was actually a couple of spots that things were heading. So some of those are really, it's usually the ones that are the biggest savings are where you've got lots of depth. And so sites that are 500 to 1,000 foot deep, or at least a couple 100 foot. We've had people that are drilling wells that are 150,000 a piece, $500,000 a piece, and so you're paying for your imaging and like a couple of wells worth, and you've paid for imaging depending on how much your wells cost. So if you got expensive wells, deep wells, or if you're off in the water, it's sort of absolute no-brainer that you would take scans instead. It's the basic gas station, basic dry cleaner. It's the sort of problem of, if I just add a couple more holes, I think I'll understand. And then they call us when they've done about 100 in a little gas station, and like, yep, a couple more holes after 100 wells, we don't understand. And then we come in and show them what's happening. And the scans usually pretty quickly show you what's happening in the context of the wells that are available, and the parts that were sort of missed. So things go between wells or underneath wells. And it's not that people aren't good at analysis, it's that the technique fundamentally can't see well enough to be able to make great decisions. So in terms of cost effectiveness, there's places where you have really big advances, and other ones it's, okay, how far down the road should we go with adding 3 more wells before we should have scanned 12 wells ago? So it's similar to when you go to the doctor and they take some blood and they look at things and they go, should we do more expensive things? Should we go and do the surgery? Should we do this? And you see this at the doctor where they're like going, that's a bigger expense to do these next steps. Should we do that? And so if there's any remediation that's going to be performed that you're going, the remedial budget's above $1 million, you absolutely should scan first. And that's, a remedial design characterization issue of, if we're going to heat it or do anything that is $1 million plus, you definitely want to scan first, because you're going to want to make that problem much more well-defined. And a lot of times when they've done that with us, we're like, actually, your remedial plan won't work, and here's why. And they switch remedial plans. So it's the same decision point that on the medical side, you're in the doctors and you're like, they should have done surgery. They did do surgery and they shouldn't have done it quite then. And it's kind of a fuzzy line as to when to do those things. So sometimes it's really clear. They came into the emergency room and they're missing that arm. It's in the ice bucket next to them. Maybe we should do surgery, versus they've got some pain and do we do something? We are going through the same issues on our projects of, hey, they've come in, they've got these well data, it says these things. Should we invest in scanning and looking around? Should we just add a couple more wells? And then once we decide to do some remediation, how we make sure that investment goes well. And our investment in adding remedial design characterization to their remediations is usually like 10% or less. Sometimes it's like 1% of the remedial costs. But it's not something that people standard do. They go, okay, well, we've done the initial blood test, now we're going to go do surgery. It's like, we're sort of at the in-between of, let's add some more data to that blood test, figure out really what the patient's doing before we go to surgery.
Okay, thanks. Tony Morgan has another question. How do we handle interference in urban areas?
Oh yeah, that's again, not to sound redundant here, but a matter of logistics. So we cannot go right over the top of a buried metallic pipe. And let me just pull up our FAQs here real quick. So something to talk to here. There it is. All right. So yeah, if we go right over the top of a metallic pipeline, it's going to look something like this. It's just all super conductive, so essentially it blanked us out. So what we do is we get the utility maps. We have GPR locators come out. We do public locates. We get all the utilities marked out, and we make sure we're offset by some buffer, or like this image is shown here, we can go cross a pipeline orthogonally or perpendicularly, and we'll get a pipe shadow in the middle, but the imagery or the data is still intact on either side of where we cross the pipeline, and you can still get anomalies that can be targeted. So this is a real world example where a pipe was crossed here, and we had a resistive anomaly over here that was targeted and sampled to be coal tar. So we just work around utilities. We've done refineries up in the East Coast where the ground is a spaghetti bowl of pipelines, and it's just careful planning and good field logistics. So.
Perfect. And let's see, Lad has another question. How do we cost effectively mobilize to the San Francisco Bay Area?
Well, we have worked there before. So I'd say give me a call or an email after this webinar, and let's set up a chat and we can take a look.
We'll actually be in the Bay Area next week doing field work as well.
Oh, thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
So if you're,
we are headed there this week. Actually.
I know it can be hard to coordinate the field work that quickly, but if it's something you're really interested in, maybe give me a call today or something, and we can take a look at that, because our team, it does save a significant amount of money if we're able to do it while we're out there. So.
And I will say Bay Area is not that far for us in terms of mobilization. We don't stress too much about mobilization costs unless we're shipping our equipment overseas.
Yeah, we're central. Our equipment's
still
centrally
doable.
Located. Yep.
Yes.
Still doable, just more expensive to ship overseas.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat or the Q&A. Thanks, Sam, by the way, for reminding us that we're going there next week.
No problem.
In fact, I think Sam may be going there. I'm not totally sure.
Yep.
But okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, Kyle, I'll let you wrap things up then.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. Like we said, we'll get those certificates out as well as a copy of the slides and the presentation, and hope everyone has a good rest of their week. Take care. Bye-bye.